Hello, this is Martheya with KNOWBOX Dance. On today's episode of Meet the Makers, we're joined by Douglas Rosenberg, the maker behind the KNOWBOX Dance official selection film titled The Sea. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Good to be here.
To start us off, can you please introduce yourself and your film?
Okay, I'm Douglas Rosenberg, and the film is called The Sea. It's a 64-minute feature-length dance film with no dialogue, particularly some text, but it's not a narrative piece. That's a non-narrative feature.
We're so excited to have your film a part of our festival this year. Could you talk to us about why you decided to make this work and what kind of message you want to share with audiences?
Yeah, this piece comes out of a longer time spent thinking about masculinity, in particular, starting with thinking about my own father and the way that he kind of lived among men as someone who was in World War II, and a lot of the people that he was surrounded by were also that same generation, and the kind of bond or the kind of way that they performed masculinity was really interesting to me as I got older, mainly because I didn't feel like I had a similar kind of space in my life, for better or for worse. That was a great space, but I didn't have that space. And that set me to thinking about how I might incorporate that in various parts of my work and projects that I was doing. So this particular project came about when The Sea came about, when I had the opportunity to show a previous film of mine in Sweden on Bergman's Island, place where Ingmar Bergman, the Swedish director, lived and worked, and where his home still is, and they call the Bergman Center there on the island of Fora. And I went there to screen this other film, which was a dream come true for me because he was so influential to me in my early life, looking at film and thinking about film. And there I was in this extraordinary landscape on the edge of the Baltic Sea. And on that same trip, I met a number of Swedish men and felt that there was some difference in the way that they carried themselves and the way they interacted with the world and with each other. And I thought, this is the place I want to make my next film. And I think these are the men I want to work with. I didn't know any of them, but that's another part of the story. But I ended up making the film there. And over the course of a couple of years working on that project with this group of older men and men, I refer to them as men of the third age, of which I am, between 60 and 80 is the third age. And it became really the most amazing experience I think I've ever had working on a project.
I love to hear about that. Is there a pivotal scene, whether it's from the process of creating the film or in the final product of the film, that really stands out to you and this concept of men in the third age?
Yeah, boy, that's one scene would be hard to come up with. I might while I'm talking about this, but the way that I approach a lot of my work when I'm working with film, particularly, is that we start by workshopping with the people who were in the film. So we did 2 4-day workshops in Sweden before we ever picked up a camera. And those workshops were about telling stories, about becoming comfortable with each other, about asking the men to take the stories they were telling and pull gestures out of those stories, and then to talk about where those gestures may be in their body, how those memories make them feel and where they feel that feeling, and really slowly developing a kind of trust so that they could actually do things that, in my experience, men, especially men of my age, don't do. And a lot of those things really come from the way boys carry themselves when they're younger. So throughout the film, there's a number of scenes where the men are in very close proximity to each other. They're never very far apart in the film, and they're always gesturing to each other through their movement language. And so we did a lot of, in those workshops, we did a lot of simply follow the leader. We talked a lot about the games that we remember as children. We reenacted those games as grown men. Super, super simple things. And then through that, the group became really easy with, how can I say it, demonstrating or being in an intimate way with each other. And so I think, so there's a couple places to answer your question where there's a scene where the men are in a field, they're wearing white shirts, and somebody referred to that as I think the term is Elysian fields. Fields, it's a biblical term. It's a place after death, I think, that feels heavenly. So in that scene, and it's all black and white, the whole film's black and white, the men are, I guess the best way to say it would be dancing with each other, just very slowly dancing and feeling each other, touching each other, holding each other. It's for me, very heartbreaking scene. And so that's a pivotal scene, I think, where you get to see the men strip away artifice and strip away things that would keep them from being intimate in that way and give into that.
That's such a powerful scene. I'm excited for our audiences to see the work. Doug, at KNOWBOX Dance, our tagline here is say no to the box and yes to the future of dance. And I could certainly think of many ways, not just this film, but your work does that. But how do you say no to the box and yes to the future of dance?
So I'll answer the last part first. So the idea of no to the box, or yes to the future, rather, the idea of yes to the future makes me think about the past, to be totally honest. And the earliest days that I was aware of dance and its relationship with the moving image goes all the way back to art, when I was at art school, and things we looked at in those days. But I've written a lot about this also, but the first thing that people did with the invention of moving image technology was to point it at something that moved. Because in order for us to believe that cinema is happening, we have to see something change position across the screen. So the earliest things, there's this beautiful film. It's a Thomas Edison film. It's in the Smithsonian. It's an image which he made specifically to test the early technology of sound recording. And it's two men. I think it's called the Dickinson film. I think it's called. It's two men, and they're dancing similarly to the way that scene that I just explained to you is. And they're just dancing. And this is the late 1800s, and it's a silent film, and you can see the record player device. It wasn't a record player, but you can see that in the background, and you can see these two men dancing ostensibly to the sound that record player thing is making. And they're just dancing, and they're not performing. They're not editorializing. They're not doing steps. They're just dancing in space. So all the way back to the beginning of those technologies. And then as we get up through the years, people know who Maya Deren is, of course. You start to see these experiments with movement on screen. The other part of your question about how do you say no to the box is one that I have a lot of passion about, because my greatest fear is that screen dance, or dance for the camera, however you want to call it, gets reduced to simply a reconstruction of choreography that was made somewhere else and then dropped into a location or a venue, and then have it subject to a really kind of simple set of editing tools and ideas and such like that. So that what we're getting really is concert dance in the center of the screen with no relationship to its environment or to the history, the vast history of how cinema has responded to movement on screen in general. And that, I don't mean that to sound critical of anybody, but I mean it as a prompt to say, if we look back at how other people have, in other generations, have approached the screen, it's often been a kind of an avant-garde approach to thinking about art in a larger sense. To make things that were in which there was movement, dance, what have you, but to do it in a way that is a bit subversive or a bit of a pushback to the status quo. That's what's interesting to me.
And we can definitely relate with a lot of what you've talked about and why we've created No Box Dance in the first place, to create spaces for people to push boundaries in the ways that artists have from the beginning, really. As you can tell to our listeners and our audience, Doug is full of wisdom and insight and creativity, and we know you all will very much enjoy his work in the film The Sea. Doug, for our audience, how can they stay connected with you and everything that you're doing behind the screen?
That's a good question. I'm easy to find through email because I teach at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I'm out there in the world. I have an Instagram page like everyone else. I have a website like everyone else. Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find, and I'm happy to hear from anyone about screen dance related stuff.
Well, fantastic. And we'll make sure to link all of that out in this video as well. Thank you again, Doug, for trusting us and submitting your film to our festival and for creating the work that you do.
And thank you and your team too for doing all the stuff that you do, because it's like I said before, it's a really great undertaking that you guys are putting together.